Strasbourg, July 15, 18. A woman named Frau Trophy steps into the narrow medieval street and begins to dance. Not at a festival, not at a wedding, just dancing, in the middle of the street, alone. Her feet move in frantic, jerking patterns. Her arms flail, she spins, stumbles, catches herself, and continues, hour after hour. No music, no celebration, just relentless, compulsive movement. By nightfall, she's still dancing. By the next morning, she hasn't stopped. Within a week, 34 others have joined her, compelled by something no one can name. They were forced to dance, until their feet bled, until they collapsed from exhaustion, until their hearts gave out. By the end of August, somewhere between 50 and 400 people have been consumed by this impossible affliction. Many of them will die, not from poison, not from plague, not from any weapon you could hold in your hand. They will die from dancing. This is not folklore. This is not a legend that has been embellished over centuries. This is a documented historical fact, recorded in 6 separate contemporary chronicles, preserved in city council records, and verified by multiple eyewitness accounts. The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of history's most disturbing medical mysteries. Because here's the paradox that makes this case so deeply unsettling. There was no infectious agent, no biological pathogen, no toxin could explain the symptoms, and yet it spread like a disease. The authorities prescribed a cure, build stages, hire musicians, encourage more dancing, to sweat out the sickness, and the cure made it worse. Today we're performing a forensic autopsy on a plague that weaponized the human body against itself. We're investigating a historical event where the line between mind and matter, between psychological and physical, between rational and occult, dissolves into a haunting question. Can belief alone kill you? To understand why Strasbourg became ground zero for mass self-destruction, you need to understand what the city had become by 1518. This wasn't a thriving Renaissance hub. This was a population on the edge of systemic collapse. The decade leading up to the dancing plague had been catastrophic. Famine swept through the region repeatedly. Smallpox and syphilis, then a terrifying new disease, ravaged the population. Extreme weather destroyed crops. Floods wiped out harvests. The economy was in freefall, but it wasn't just material suffering, it was existential dread. The medieval mind didn't separate physical disaster from divine punishment. When your child died of disease, when your crops failed, when your body wasted away, it wasn't random, it was judgment. God, or the saints, or darker forces, were actively angry with you. And in Strasbourg, there was a very specific saint associated with uncontrollable movement, Saint Vitus. Vitus was the patron saint of dancers, epileptics, and anyone suffering from what was called chorea. This is an involuntary, jerking movements. But here's the thing about saint veneration in the Middle Ages. It was a protection racket. Saints could cure you, but they could also curse you. If you offended Saint Vitus, if you danced on his feast day when you should have been praying, if you failed to make an offering, if you committed sins associated with bodily excess, he could inflict you with his dancing curse. Your body would move against your will, possessed by divine punishment, until you made proper penance. This wasn't fringe belief. This was mainstream theology. So when Frau Trophy started dancing in July 1518, the population of Strasbourg had a ready-made explanation. Saint Vitus was punishing the city for its sins. The famine, the disease, the apocalyptic weather, it was all connected. And now, the saint was claiming victims directly. And here's where the pathology of systems kicks in. Because when the dancing plague began to spread, when dozens of people started exhibiting the same compulsive movements, the city authorities didn't panic. They consulted physicians. And the physicians, operating within the medical framework of 1518, came to a conclusion. The afflicted were suffering from hot blood. Yes, hot blood. According to medieval humoral theory, illness resulted from imbalances in the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The dancers, the doctors reasoned, had too much blood that had become overheated, causing it to boil and agitate the body. The prescribed cure: let them dance it off. Encourage the movement. Provide venues. Hire musicians. Build stages. The dancing would purge the excess heat and restore balance. The city council followed this advice. They opened guild halls. They hired professional musicians. They constructed wooden platforms in public squares, specifically for the afflicted to dance on. They institutionalized the plague, and predictably, catastrophically, it got worse. More people joined the dancing. The movements became more violent. Witnesses reported dancers screaming, weeping, begging for it to stop, but unable to control their own bodies. Some danced until their feet were shredded and bloody. Others collapsed mid-movement, suffering strokes or heart attacks. Contemporary chronicles describe up to 15 deaths per day at the peak of the outbreak. The system designed to heal had become the mechanism of harm. By late August, the authorities finally changed course. They banned public dancing entirely. They silenced the musicians. They sent the afflicted on religious processions to shrines of Saint Vitus, hoping divine intercession would break the curse. And slowly, over the course of September, the dancing plague subsided, but it left no clear explanation. Just bodies, just questions, just the haunting reality that an entire city had been consumed by something that shouldn't have been possible. If you're the kind of person who finds historical medical mysteries fascinating, and let's be honest, if you've made it this far, you definitely are, consider subscribing. We're building a library of forensic investigations into history's darkest anomalies, and this is just the beginning. So what actually happened in Strasbourg in 1518? Let's examine the two competing theories, because this is where the paradox becomes forensically interesting. Theory 1. Ergot poisoning. The biological explanation: ergot is a fungus that grows on rye and other grains, particularly in damp conditions. When consumed, it acts as a powerful hallucinogen, basically natural LSD. It causes convulsions, muscle spasms, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in the extremities called St. Anthony's fire. Ergot poisoning has been documented throughout history. Some historians believe it may have contributed to the Salem witch trials. It's a real phenomenon with real, horrifying symptoms. And Strasbourg in 1518 had the perfect conditions: wet weather, widespread rye consumption, a starving population eating contaminated bread. So case closed, right? Mass ergot poisoning explains the dancing plague. Well, not quite. Here's the problem: ergot poisoning would have caused convulsions, not coordinated dancing. The afflicted would have been writhing in pain, vomiting, experiencing gangrene in their extremities as blood flow was restricted. But the historical accounts describe organized, sustained movement, people dancing for days, moving in patterns, responding to music. You can't dance for 6 days straight while your body is shutting down from ergot toxicity. The physical effects would incapacitate you long before exhaustion could kill you. And here's the other issue: if this were ergot poisoning, why did it cluster so specifically? Why didn't everyone eating rye bread in Strasbourg start dancing? Why were the victims primarily lower-class women? Why did the contagion spread in a social pattern rather than a random distribution? The ergot theory is compelling, but it doesn't fit the forensic evidence. Theory 2. Mass psychogenic illness. The psychological explanation. This is the explanation most modern historians favor, particularly John Waller, whose book A Time to Dance, A Time to Die is the definitive contemporary analysis. Mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria, though that term carries problematic baggage, describes real physical symptoms caused by psychological stress spreading through a population. It's not faking it. It's not all in their heads. In the dismissive sense, it's the mind generating genuine physiological responses to unbearable psychological conditions. And Strasbourg in 1518 had textbook conditions for MPI: extreme communal stress, famine, disease, economic collapse, apocalyptic religious anxiety. The population was psychologically shattered. A culturally available explanation: the curse of Saint Vitus, gave people a framework to understand their symptoms. If you believed the saint could make you dance against your will, and you saw others dancing, your body could manifest the same symptoms. Social reinforcement. When the city built stages and hired musicians, they validated the affliction. They sent the message: this is real, this is happening, this is how you respond to the curse. Focused on a marginalized group, the dancers were overwhelmingly poor women, the demographic with the least power, the most stress, and the least control over their circumstances. Psychogenic illness often targets those with the least agency. The MPI theory explains the social clustering, the duration, the way it spread through observation rather than physical contact. But here's what it doesn't fully explain: the lethality. People died, not just one or two. Dozens, possibly hundreds. Documented deaths from exhaustion, strokes, heart attacks. Mass psychogenic illness doesn't usually kill people. It causes real symptoms: paralysis, seizures, fainting, but fatalities are extremely rare. So how did the dancing plague become so deadly? The answer, horrifyingly, is that the system killed them by building stages and encouraging continuous dancing. The authorities created the conditions for lethal exhaustion. By validating the affliction as something that required dancing to cure, they trapped the sufferers in a self-perpetuating cycle. The dancers believed, genuinely, completely, that they couldn't stop, that stopping meant death or eternal damnation, that the only way through was to dance until the curse lifted, and so they did, until their bodies failed. The dancing plague wasn't just a medical event, it was a systemic failure, where cultural belief, medical ignorance, and institutional response converged into a perfect storm of self-destruction. So what do we learn from Strasbourg, 1518? First, understand that the mind is not metaphorical. Psychological stress produces real, measurable, lethal physical effects. The dancing plague demonstrates that belief systems, when internalized under conditions of extreme stress, can weaponize the body against itself. This isn't ancient history. Modern mass psychogenic illnesses continue to occur. Outbreaks of fainting, seizures, and paralysis in schools, epidemics of unexplained illness in closed communities. The mechanics are the same: communal stress, cultural framework, social reinforcement. Second, recognize the danger of systemic validation. When authorities respond to a psychological crisis by treating it as purely physical, they can inadvertently make it worse. The Strasbourg City Council meant well. Their physicians genuinely believed they were helping. But by building stages and hiring musicians, they took a localized psychological crisis and turned it into a self-sustaining epidemic. This pattern repeats throughout history. Systems that respond to symptoms without understanding causes often amplify the very problems they're trying to solve. Third, learn to distinguish correlation from causation in historical analysis. The dancing plague coincided with ergot-friendly weather conditions, religious fervor around St. Vitus, and economic collapse. It's tempting to pick one cause and declare the case solved. But reality is rarely that clean. The dancing plague was likely a convergence: environmental stressors, cultural frameworks, psychological breaking points, and systemic failures, all colliding in one terrible summer. The paradox is that both explanations, biological and psychological, are partially true, and neither is sufficient alone. And finally, understand the power of narrative contamination. The dancing plague has been retold, mythologized, and sensationalized for 5 centuries. Every retelling adds layers of interpretation that make it harder to see the historical reality. Some accounts claim demonic possession, others insist it was mass delusion. Some treat it as a curiosity, a bizarre footnote in medical history. But for the people of Strasbourg in 1518, this wasn't entertainment, it was trauma. It was watching your neighbors, your family members, your community members lose control of their own bodies and dance themselves to death. And if this kind of deep dive historical analysis is your thing, where we treat the past as a crime scene and investigate with forensic rigor, hit that subscribe button. We're committed to performing psychological autopsies on history's darkest anomalies, and there's a lot more to uncover. The dancing plague of 1518 ended in early September, roughly 2 months after it began. There was no miracle cure, no dramatic intervention. It simply stopped. The official response, the religious processions to St. Vitus's shrine, the banning of public dancing, may have helped break the social reinforcement loop, or perhaps the psychological pressure simply exhausted itself. We don't know. What we do know is that Strasbourg buried its dead, dismantled the dancing stages, and tried to move on. But the questions remain. Can belief alone generate fatal symptoms? Can a community's collective psychological breakdown manifest as physical contagion? Can the systems designed to protect us become the instruments of our destruction? The dancing plague says yes. It stands as a permanent reminder that the boundary between mind and body, between psychology and pathology, between the rational and the inexplicable, is far more permeable than we'd like to believe. Frau Trofei stepped into that street in July 1518 and started dancing. We don't know why. We don't know what broke inside her mind, what confluence of stress and belief and desperation manifested as uncontrollable movement. But we know what happened next. Her private suffering became public contagion, her personal crisis became systemic catastrophe, and in the end, the only cure was exhaustion. The dancing plague of 1518 wasn't caused by a pathogen you could isolate in a lab. It wasn't the result of demonic possession or saintly vengeance. It was the result of a population pushed past the breaking point, a culture that provided a framework for the breakdown, and a system that validated the destruction. It was the moment when an entire city's body became the weapon turned against itself. And the most unsettling part, it could happen again. Because the conditions that created the dancing plague, systemic stress, cultural frameworks for interpreting suffering, institutional responses that amplify rather than resolve crises, those conditions never really went away, they just found new forms.